Our guest today is T.J. Meyer. T.J. is an authority on the Civil War and a lifelong student of American history. He enjoys walking the hallowed grounds of the battlefields where the very fate of the young nation was at stake and where so many fought for their cause. Welcome to the show, T.J.
Well, thank you, Dr. Joyce. I'm glad to be here.
Well, coming from Tennessee, I'm very interested in talking with you. You wrote a book called Caged Confederates. What is this book about, and what has writing the book taught you?
The book is about the climatic fight for the crucial waterways that are interior in Tennessee and allowed the Union Army to invade Tennessee. There's a lot that we can learn about the crucial role that Tennessee played in the Civil War.
You lived in Tennessee for 6 years. I've been here for 14. Tell us, why would our Tennessee listeners be interested in this book?
Well, I think like many Americans, they may have relatives who fought in the Civil War, especially one of the three battles that I touch upon. God forbid, some of their relatives may have been captured and spent time in the notorious Union federal prison up in Camp Douglas, Chicago, Illinois. At the very least, I think they're going to get an enjoyable read about the action-packed history in their very own backyard. I think it's important that we know who we are as a people, our shared culture, and where we came from. And this is especially important in a digital day when so many children are text messaging and their laptops become fixtures of them. You know, we've dummied down their analytical skills because they just don't crack open the spine of a book. So if you're a parent, I would encourage them to read to their children and to teach them the history in their backyard in Tennessee, or American history and the bigger picture, and to share that with them and get them engaged and let them know where they came from.
I think that's really a great point, the getting them engaged part, because knowledge is power, and with knowledge going around the internet and everywhere else that we can get knowledge from these days, it isn't always correct knowledge. So it's really important that we get something out of a book from somebody who's done the research and that we understand exactly where the subject is coming from.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
Thank you. Why do you call your subtitle The Civil War's Turning Point, Tennessee?
Well, Tennessee was really a crucial point of entry for the Union invasion force into the heart of the Confederacy. The waterways were vital for both sides to control. The successful capture and control of these vital arteries allowed the Union to invade Tennessee and subsequently to capture Nashville, which was the first secessionist capital to fall in the war. In the big picture, President Lincoln implemented a military strategy called the Anaconda Plan. And this story was part of the plan to blockade the southern ports and to control the interior waterways. The story culminates with the capture of New Orleans, the second largest city in the South at the time, and also the largest port city in the South. And this had momentous repercussions to the southern economy and the ability to wage the war, since the Confederate government was crippled in equipping their armies in the field. So Tennessee was totally a turning point in the Civil War, and it doesn't get the due recognition that, say, the Eastern battles like Gettysburg, Antietam, Sharpsburg, Fredericksburg get in novels and in the history books. So I wanted to rectify that and talk about the crucial role that Tennessee played.
Well, this is great information. I live here, and I did not know this information, and I think it's real important that everybody really know where everything came from, and I think that your explanation is really a great place for them to start. Why are you qualified to write this story, TJ?
I'm a retired lieutenant colonel out of the U.S. Air Force Reserves. I'm a lifelong student of history, a world traveler, and I'm a passionate storyteller. I love to tell stories, be it in books or my screenplays or like we're doing right now on a radio show. When I was 15, I visited Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, and it was there that I got the Civil War bug. I talked with the park ranger about American history and the Civil War battle that we were looking at, and we spoke over the barrel of a cannon that overlooked the Chattanooga River. And he said, I have that book in my library too. That's a great book. And we probably talked for 2 hours, and I was just mesmerized by his storytelling acumen and his ability to deliver the facts in a passionate and exciting way. That's where I became a Civil War bug, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to write stories someday, and I'm going to read about them and research and change that kind of history too, because I love that kind of stuff. And if you're a parent out there listening, I would hope you would encourage your children, as my folks always did in between assignments. They would stop at battlefield. Tim wanted to go see this, TJ wanted to go see that, and they would stop and allow me to go visit those places to encourage my love of history and story. that's why I became a writer.
Well, you certainly have the credentials, but more so you have the passion, and I think passion is what is required for you to be able to write such a book and to be able to get that point across.
Oh, absolutely. Your show is about how to help people to self-actualize, how to help them to realize their dreams, and how to become better versions of themselves. Being an author or being an artist or being a business person or the better parent that you can be or the best coach or mentor to somebody that you can be, it all begins with your passion and your vision for how to help somebody else in that journey of life. If you can do things to better yourself and also to help somebody else, like one of my favorite mantras is cooperate and graduate, meaning share your knowledge, show somebody else, give them the tools and the resources, take the time to listen to them and to help them become the better versions of themselves. And I hope your listeners, if they get any takeaway today, that they will do that with their kids and read to them and spend time with them and help them. You never know. They may be the next James Michener or John Grisham in their own household.
You don't ever know. The Civil War has been over for such a long time. What new insights does your story bring to light?
Well, I venture a guess that most Americans don't know that the Union Navy's newly built ironclad gunboats received their baptism of fire in Tennessee at the very battles of Fort Henry and Donelson that I talk about in my story. And this was the genesis of what we would call in the U.S. Navy the Brown River Navy, where the Union Navy used these shallow draft vessels that were able to go up and down interior waterways of Tennessee and actually attack these forts. I bet a lot of Americans, and I'm originally, I have to say I'm a gypsy. I was born on an Air Force base in Illinois. So I've been moving all my life pretty much. I would venture to say that most people from Illinois and Chicago don't even realize that there was a Camp Douglas in Chicago where over 6,000 Confederate prisoners of war met their end. And so I think it's a compelling story because this is a huge city with all of its affluence and resources in the land of Lincoln. And the POWs were starved, ill-clad, and received very little medical treatment. It's been said that the victor writes the history, and I wanted to bring to light an intriguing story that deserves to be told to balance out the historical count, so to speak.
Well, I definitely think that it would be an intriguing story. I think a lot of people don't even know where Tennessee is, let alone what they're known for. So I do think it's important. It's a great state. And when I drive by these forts and I see things that used to be, I always wondered exactly what did happen here. And I know people that had husbands and they've been here because of their husbands who have fought in the war. They're very much knowledgeable about it, but I think anyone who hasn't fought in the war is not. So I think that this book is a very compelling story for people to read so that they can get the full story about what Tennessee has done and their involvement with the Civil War.
Well, absolutely. Tennessee is replete with history. I'm kind of jealous because, like I said, I lived there 6 years. Both of my sons were born in Knoxville. And just love the state, love touring it and getting to visit all the great places that I talk about and that I've been to. And Tennessee really, truly was a turning point in the Civil War. And so hopefully a lot of your listeners will get out in some weekend in the near future and go visit some of the great places that you have in your own backyard.
That's right. They are in our own backyard. It's really interesting. Well, what else can we learn from your book, DJ?
Well, you can learn about the highly profitable and very dangerous business of blockade running. Now, I've always loved that movie, like millions of other people. In fact, they just had the 70th anniversary of Gone with the Wind.
Yes.
But I was always frustrated because we never got to see Captain Rhett Butler actually in action as a blockade runner.
Right.
That's pretty exciting stuff, and we just never get to see it in the movie. So I thought, in my story, I'm going to go ahead and fix that.
Well, you nominated yourself to fix it. I think that's great. So obviously I know that you wrote the book because you were passionate about the subject, but any other reasons why you decided to write this book?
Well, yes, because history is so important. It's just basically a lot of decisions that are made that change the course of history, if you will, or how we live our lives. And this story was no different. If it wasn't for the battles that I described, Fort Henry and Donelson, and the victories there for the Union Army, which were the very first victories, General Grant, who at the time was a very little-known brigadier general stationed in the backwater of the war at Cairo, Illinois, if he hadn't won those victories, he wouldn't have been propelled into the national spotlight. and ultimately to become the commander of the whole Union Army, and of
Yes.
course, as we know, later to become the 18th President of the United States. So Tennessee was, again, a turning point because this premier celebrity, before the term was even coined, General Grant, became famous, and he was able to invade the South through Tennessee because of the interior waterways that I described earlier.
Right. Well, it definitely is a passionate subject of yours and should be for a lot of people, especially people that are living in Tennessee, to know their own history. Well, how is a story relevant to the people in Tennessee? I know we know it's relevant, but how can we get them to know it's relevant?
Second only to Virginia, more battles were fought in Tennessee during the Civil War than any other state. Tennessee was probably the most divided state in the South. Often, family members fought for the Union as well as for the South. Your state is steeped in rich, exciting history, and you have so many great places to visit on the weekend. Tennessee was pivotal because on the western side you had the cotton production in Memphis and such, but on the eastern side the topography didn't lend itself to plantations, so you had a lot of small farms, and hog production was crucial for Tennessee because it was the bacon and the ham from Tennessee that fed the southern armies. So Tennessee again fed the South and was a food basket for the South during the war, and had strategic cities. And the Cumberland Gap, the topography in eastern Tennessee was very important, just like the waterways are important to the west. But basically, you're going to read about a character called Thomas Killian, my protagonist, who was a typical Irish-American farmer who just basically wanted to defend his homeland. And I think a lot of your listeners will definitely relate that, hey, we're going to do whatever we can to protect hearth and home from, as they would term, the invader. It's a great, compelling story that people that especially live in Tennessee are going to get excited about and want to go visit those kind of places on the weekend after they read about it.
I think that they probably will. Sounds like it would make a great movie. Tell us whether you're thinking of making it into a movie.
It occurred to me when I was trying to think, I'm a screenwriter and I've written 8 screenplays as well. Caged Confederates is a screenplay by the same name. I wrote the screenplay before I wrote the book. So I write to entertain and I write to educate. But first and foremost, I want to entertain you because I think you're going to like reading history or seeing history on the silver screen. Yes, it would make a great movie.
I do think that this would make a movie that a lot of people would want to go to because people are interested in being educated and learning about where they live, or if they live in the South, I think they'd be interested in seeing such a movie. So I hope it does happen. Well, why do you tell the story from a Southern perspective?
Well, I felt that the part about the Union prison in Chicago needed to be told from the vantage point of a Southern prisoner to fully appreciate just how horrific that place really was. The core of any good story is conflict, and this story is just full of conflict, obviously being the Civil War.
Right.
But the human interest aspects and the romance and the intrigue, not just the fight at the battlefields, but the activities at the home front. What were the women doing while the men were away fighting these battles and getting captured and stuff like that? That really intrigued me in my research to discover what was going on behind the scenes at the home front. But it had to really be told from a Southern perspective to really take it to a fresh angle, to tell the story about the prison camp up in Chicago and give it some fresh eyes.
Definitely, I think you need to tell it from the home front as well as on the field so people can understand the whole gamut of what went on at that time. Well, how does the Civil War impact us today? So many people today don't even know about the wars that used to be. So tell us how it does impact us, and perhaps some of our younger listeners will take some information in about what was happening at that time.
Well, I guess the obvious answer is that Tennessee, like so many states in the North and South, is replete with battlefields that are well-preserved havens for generations to tromp around and to learn about their shared American history. So many fought in this uniquely American war, and many of us have relatives who did so. One of my ancestors was captured and survived the infamous Andersonville prison in Georgia. Our attics often contain diaries, daguerreotypes, letters, and memorabilia collected from 150 years ago. The Civil War was America against America, brother against brothers, and it tore families apart like no other American war. The stories are an integral part of who we are, and they tell where we came from. even in places like Denver, where we didn't have a Civil War battle, we have a monument, a Civil War monument. This is right in front of the state capitol in Denver. Many of the settlers came to Colorado to settle and were Civil War veterans or had family members that were, so they erected this monument. So, like I said, I think most of the towns, especially in the South, have monuments, memorabilia, and diaries of a very personal nature to that families treasure, and they've kept for over 150 years. And I would like to see, as a writer, I'd like to see them all out there so that we can all enjoy and read them. But it definitely impacts us today, and we're still fascinated with it.
Is there anything that you could tell us that would make the story topical now?
Well, the 150th anniversary of the Civil War is April 12th, 2011. We're going to be inundated very soon, I would think, with news outlets, radio stations, televisions, and movies about Civil War shows, and certainly the reenactors in Tennessee will be out there in full force telling the stories and shooting their guns and such. But arguably, the Civil War is one of the most important, if not the most important, period in American history, where the very nation, this young democracy, was really put to the test. At this time, when we have the anniversary, we're going to be given an opportunity to look back on our part so we can learn about the human prejudices and intolerances that started the war. We can learn from history that if allowed to go unchecked, these kind of intolerances could escalate and become something dark and ugly, in this case, become a catalyst for war. So history, like life, is a great teacher, and we must learn from the lessons it teaches so we don't repeat the same mistakes. Never take a cavalier attitude about these weighty things such as war. The Civil War taught us that many of our forebears were overjoyed about the prospect of a great Civil War. They couldn't wait to get to the battlefield. But as we find out, each side doggedly fought to prevail, and when it finally ended 4 bloody years later, both sides were physically and emotionally exhausted by the experience.
I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And so many lives were lost. Over 600,000 Americans were killed. So our nation is involved in 2 protracted wars right now. Basically, like I said, history can teach us that we must not celebrate war or take a cavalier attitude about it. We can certainly do better.
And I do think that just knowing about it, just understanding it, just listening to what you have to say and reading your book would definitely be some steps to take in order for them to have a better understanding. Is there anything you'd like to add for our listeners today, TJ?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, the biggest takeaway I'd like your listeners to come away with is that writing the book was quite a joy for me. It was quite a labor of love. It took a lot of work. If they have a dream like that, to dream big, because it doesn't cost you anything to dream big. You can have small dreams, but I always have big ones. I'm very ambitious. So
me too.
I think, if you want to write that screenplay or write that book or be the best whatever you want to be, you just have to go for it. And you really just have to put your focus to doing what you have to do to make sure you find the answers. You don't have to have all the answers at the beginning of the journey. You just have to be willing to put the work into it and strive to take your vision and run with it. And not listen to all the detractors. Believe me, as a writer, I've received my share of rejections just like every author or any artist out there receives. It just comes with the territory. You have to get a thick skin. But basically, anything worth going for is worth working for. I would just encourage them to look out for the dreams and to help their kids follow their pursuits as well.
Well, there's many quotes out about that if you're not getting distractors and you're not getting people that are telling you what you're doing is wrong, then you're not going to have anything successful. So you really do have to know, you have to know you. You have to know what you can do and not listen to anybody telling you that you can't do it, because that is definitely not true. Anybody that reads my story would know that. Well, I enjoyed hearing about your book, TJ, and how can our listeners get in touch with you? Website, telephone number?
My website is historiccivilwarnovels.com. You can buy it on Amazon. You can get it through the publisher.
And the name of the book again for our listeners?
Sure. It's Caged Confederates, Capturing the Heart of the Confederacy.
Okay, well, I definitely think that's a book that will sell, and this has been a fascinating interview. Thank you so much for being our guest on the ImageMaker Presents.
Dr. Joyce, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I wish you the best with your program and wish your listeners the very best. and read. Please go out and read.
Thank you very much.